get my perspective on some things. Be a little bit different today. Talk a little current events, a little war. Just been trying to get my mind around this war compared to other historical time periods. Where does this fit? What is it like? Have we been here before? Is Israel, Judea, the Jewish people, have they been here before? What does that look like in their history compared to now? And from that perspective, I'm in obviously thinking about it from a Jesus perspective in Jesus' time. That's what I like to do. I'm trying to put the message of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus into context so that I can better apply them personally, trying to understand what it was really all about. It's been difficult thinking about all that the past couple of weeks in relation to this latest escalation in war. I guess I should just start and make it clear I'm a pro-peace, anti-war person. I guess I'm not naive enough to believe that it's never necessary as far as outcomes go. I believe wars can be inevitable, but this one doesn't appear to be inevitable. This one seems to be political and a part of just a power struggle. It's the more common reason for that this is exceptional when it comes to war. I think if you were trying to look at the core reasons why things happen and why things escalate and why things eventually end up in war, it's more often than not, you're going to find some kind of political power struggle behind it, not some inevitable process that just made any other alternative impossible. I believe war is chosen as the preferred outcome many times, not the only choice, but sort of the way the people in power want to go, not the way they have to go. But I was just thinking about back in the day, back in Jesus' time, if we look at right around the time that Jesus was born, what was going on in the land at that time, and what happened immediately before, during his life, and immediately after. And I believe Christians, when they think about their faith and when they think about Jesus, they don't want to think about him, his mission, his ministry, his message, his teachings in the context of his time. It's instead there's this story that gets added to the teachings, and that story is repeated over a couple of thousand years, and it becomes what everybody believes to be the truth. But you just have to look at it. We have enough documentation from the time of Jesus and time before his life and the time after his life to really put this into a clear perspective that we can understand. Nobody forces us to do that. Our religious leaders don't force us to do that. They don't encourage us to do that. The encouragement is actually to look away from that and not to look at the reality of what was going on at Jesus' time, or the reality of what's going on in our time. It's more about the narrative. It's more about the story. Let's put this into a story format and then repeat the story enough that's what sticks. That's what people think about. That's where their focus and attention is. But if we think back to that time of Jesus, just hundreds of years of history, couldn't possibly put it in a succinct enough format for a video to explain this. But right around the birth of Jesus was this massive shift that was happening. King had died. King Herod. King Herod is such an important figure in the Jewish story and in the Christian story. And what makes him so important wasn't that, he had all these building projects and built cities and fortresses and rebuilt the temple and turned the temple into something much bigger and grander than it had ever been before. Became an even hotter spot during the time of Herod. Everything got bigger, everything got richer, everything got more active around the temple. Everything went from a place of prayer, place of worshiping God. It became a center point of the economy, of the power struggle, of the politics, of the theocracy, of the seats of power and judgment and law. And that didn't happen accidentally. That happened by design. Herod was a client king of the Roman Empire, of Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. He was chosen. He had been an ally with Julius Caesar. He allied with Augustus in his civil wars. So he wasn't just some guy. He was there doing exactly what Rome wanted. And what Rome wanted was a powerful and strong empire. And the more powerful and more strong each individual province was, the better it was for the empire. Right around the birth of Jesus, when Herod died, there was a fervor, a religious fervor, a excitement around this transition. About 100 years earlier was the last time that this land was independent and was actually under the power and control without an emperor or a king telling them what to do. The Hasmonean dynasty had sort of regained independence away from the northern Greek kingdom, Seleucid kingdom. A Seleucid kingdom eventually fell to the Romans, and the Hasmonean dynasty sort of stayed in power for a while longer before the Romans eventually got onto their doorstep and took over. That was Pompey, who was Julius Caesar's friend and ally in an eventual competition. During Jesus' life was this time after the death of Herod. The empire had lost their client king. Herod was an extremely paranoid guy. He didn't really trust anybody in his family. He didn't really have the right bloodline. He had some hand-selected high priests and high religious leaders, but they didn't all get along. It was a very tenuous, very, very delicate situation. But he had maintained power, and as soon as he died and that fracturing of power happened, Rome came in and took more direct control. So the people were living through that at the time of Jesus. It was this independence from the Hasmonean time, which felt pretty good, I'm sure, for the first time being independent, going back to before the fall to Babylon. And then you went into this semi-independent client king status. Yeah, Herod's in charge. Herod's building. Herod's doing all sorts of things, but he's a little bit crazy. He's killing anybody who tries to stand up against him, and is backed by Rome in all of his efforts. But it's still somewhat stable. Herod dies, and it gets chaotic immediately. It's chaotic for the next 140 years. And Jesus and his life and his ministry are right there in the middle of it. So I think it's important to remember that Jesus didn't live in a time of peace and harmony and, I don't know, some idyllic vision of small country towns with sheep herders and carpenters, and everything's this idyllic setting and people just walking around, and every once in a while you see some Roman soldiers and it's like, oh yeah, that's right, we're ruled by the Roman Empire. They have a badge yet. It's not what was going on at the time of peace. They did massive building projects under Herod, and then Herod's sons took over, and the sons would have all wanted to talk their father. They would have been fighting amongst themselves for legitimacy or control of their own fiefdoms within the greater kingdom. The history of the 12 tribes is full of this, going back to these times of Moses and Joshua. So if we think about the story of Jesus in that context, I think we can look at these ideas that he's presenting as far as the way a little bit differently. He was not describing the way of the temple. He was not describing the way of the Pharisees. He was not explaining the way according to Romans or according to people who came after him like Paul or other apostles or church fathers 200 years after his death. Jesus was preaching about the way in his homeland at this time of chaos, transition, uncertainty. So I struggle to understand how Christians today can take the meaning of Jesus' message and try to apply it in the Middle East and in the context of religious war, which is where we are in this war. To somehow take the message of Jesus and put it into our time, apply it today, which is what I believe it's meant to do. It's what I believe it was meant to do at the time it was delivered, all throughout history, the 2,000 years since, and our time. I believe these teachings are timeless and meant to be applied in our time. But I just can't understand why there isn't pushback from Christians against this action. Everything about it is anti-Christ. It's anti-Jesus. It's right there. All you have to do is look. take any of the actions, take any of the comments from our leaders, take the actions and the comments from the leaders in the Jewish government, the Israeli government, which, again, just like in the time of Jesus, the people that are in charge do not represent the thoughts and beliefs and desires of all of the people. You can't look at the story of Jesus and see that in his time. Then you're just not trying to see it. The same thing exists today among the Jewish people. Not everybody's on board with the actions of their leadership. They don't think they're acting on behalf of God. They don't think they're taking righteous action. And they don't think that they're doing what's right for the people. They think they're doing what's right for the leaders, and that those leaders are pursuing selfish ends. So I ask Christians, please, if you care anything about the messages I put out, or if I say anything and you're like, oh wow, that's a good perspective on Jesus, I'm glad I watched that video, or glad he put it in those terms, I would just ask you to just read the teachings of Jesus and apply them today, and ask yourself, is this from Christ? Or is it anti-Christ? You don't have to think in terms of end times, revelation, and trumpets and seals being broken. You know all that. That's a book of prophecy. That's a book of end times prophecy that people have looked at for 2,000 years and have used to say, oh, now is the time for Jesus to come back. Just don't use the end times book to try to justify the war. Don't use the Old Testament to try to justify the war. Just please look at the teachings of Jesus and try to understand what is happening. Try to look at this great master of moral teaching who Christians believe is literally God incarnate. Just look at these teachings and ask yourself, do they apply now? Should they apply now? And if so, what should we pray for? What should we hope for? What does winning look like according to Jesus? Because it's there. It's right there. When you go outside the Bible, there's even more there. When you get into the very early church, and the church at Jerusalem, and the writings and the teachings of the apostles, you go back to the source material. You get as close to Jesus as you can get. Those people who learned directly from him, those people who learned from the people who learned directly from him. You go back to those earliest days and you find out what this teaching is all about. If you want to take another step, learn a little bit more about the context, learn about what messianic prophecy really was, what people were hoping for versus what actually happened, the power of the direction of the teachings of Jesus, the reason it caught on, the reason it was popular. It was important to understand that for me. Why would this happen? Why would people follow this Messiah? What is Messiah? Why did the message not die when Jesus died? Why didn't his messianic story not end with his death? You can point to resurrection, but many other failed messiahs supposedly were resurrected too. Those, you don't know who those people are because their messianic missions failed, because their stories did not live on, their resurrection accounts and their divine influences, their interaction with divine beings or the one Almighty Father. All of their stories have faded into the background, but Jesus' story didn't. I think it's just a little... It's thinking too small to just be like, well, it's because Jesus was right and everybody else was wrong, or Jesus was true and they were false. His message still had to mean something in order for people to follow it. His message is what attracted people. It wasn't the story of his miracles. There's plenty of stories, miracles floating around. Just go back and Apollonius of Tyana, all these stories of miracle workers are all over the place. Before Jesus' life, during his life, after his life. So it wasn't miracles. The resurrection story, plenty of those floating around. They go back in history in all of these religions. There's versions of resurrection stories. Exceptionally righteous people, holy people, or demigod type people. That wouldn't have been it. There was plenty of those. This man becoming God, this was a real problem. Real problem. Christianity had to have Jesus at least also being God, or a God, or one of the gods. The Romans wouldn't accept a Messiah because he was from the line of King David, and it's like, who cares? One of the tribal leaders 1,000 years before the time of this person, he was a king, so he has some blood from that bloodline that wouldn't have mattered to the Romans. The Julius Caesar bloodline went back all the way to the gods. I believe it was Aeneas and Venus and their descendants that established the bloodline Caesars came from. So Julius Caesar had been deemed a god who walked among men. Augustus, same thing. So Jesus would at least have to be a god in order to be relevant at the time. So that wasn't why his mission survived, is because he was God. So the mission survived because of the teachings, because of the way. The Jesus way is at the very heart of his mission. It's why he had a ministry, was to teach the way. This seems to be the one part of the Jesus story that is most ignored by his church, is the following of the way. I don't know if that's deliberate. I hate to say it's deliberate. It's deliberate. That is pure darkness. That is just dark action to bury the story of the way, or to ignore the way, or to encourage people to veer off of the way and onto this path of darkness, this path of death and evil. But I think we have to at least entertain the idea that there's an element within the world today that influences Christianity and Judaism and Islam and everyone else that is a force of darkness that is trying to encourage death, division, the othering of people, the minimizing of some people, and the elevation of some ideas, cultures, religions above others in the hopes of dominating and in using religious affiliation and faith to garner support for the destruction of enemies. That is the way of death. That is the way of darkness. And that is the opposite of what Jesus taught. Being the opposite of the teaching of Christ. Makes anti-Christ. So, I hope I'm not the only person that feels that way. I hope Christians see that and feel that way and open their Bible, open their heart, open their prayer to the Almighty Father, the Creator of all, and pray for forgiveness for what we have gotten wrong, and that we are given forgiveness in the same way that we forgive those who've done us wrong. I hope the prayers there that we will not be tempted, that we will not go down these dark roads, that we will flee from darkness and evil. We will reject it and instead redirect our attention to the way of life. So I've done a couple of videos recently about some of the early church, the way of life, the way of death, the way of light, the way of dark, the two ways. Was very common and obvious teaching in the time of Jesus. And I think there's a need in our current world to talk about it in that way again. Because we find ourselves facing individually, collectively, and as a planet, the opportunity to pursue one of these two ways or continue down the path of one of these two ways. So, I will choose the path of life. Doesn't make me a righteous person. People on the path of life are the ones who most clearly and obviously see their faults and brings you to a state of repentance. You feel a genuine guilt and shame whenever you see the path of life and the path of death, and you realize the choices that you make that cause you to veer off the path, they hit home, and you feel it. And Jesus basically says, good, you're supposed to be open it. But good news, you just take that to God and ask for forgiveness. God will forgive you. And you look at the people around you and all the people that are on the path of darkness. You don't tell them, hey, you're doing wrong. You need to get back on this other path. You need to do it my way. You forgive them for what they do to you. You forgive them over and over again. Whether they're your brother or your neighbor or an enemy, you forgive them for what they do that hurts you. And then you ask God for forgiveness for the things you've done wrong, and you receive forgiveness. And then you go about implementing these teachings of Jesus in your everyday life, beyond just the forgiveness part, how you live in the world, what you prioritize, you just live the way and do your best. And it's a narrow way. It's a difficult way, but you do it because that's your way home to the kingdom, according to Jesus. That's how you find your way to his Father's house. So just recognize that we live in a world where adherence to faith blindly and following leadership, regardless of what they say and do, you follow them because they're in charge. That leads to all kinds of problems. It did in Jesus' time, and he thought it was important to come at that time and stand up and oppose it, regardless of the consequences, even if it meant his death. That was the purpose. So I hope in our time we don't have to face death simply because we want to stand up and oppose dark forces and say, that's not for me. I'm going to live this way instead. Hopefully encouraging other people to live the way of life and pulling people out of this sleepwalking through life down the path of death and in service of these dark forces, pulling people away from that and encouraging them to walk the path of life. I don't think that's as dangerous as it used to be. If it is, okay, Jesus gave us some instruction there too. Just, you want to follow me? Take up your cross. Follow me. You'll be persecuted in my name. People won't like it. People will accuse you of all sorts of things. But that's okay. Forget. Just continue down the path of life. So. It's difficult, but it's doable. And I think we're going to see a lot of people making this choice in the very near future. I'm hopeful that this path and the way it is going to see a resurgence. And I believe it happened at the time of Jesus because of the very real events going on in the world at that time. And we have some very real events going on right now too. So we'll see how it all works out. But just so you know, there's this other way. Jesus spends a lot of time talking about it in the Bible. And if you can set aside your fear, you will find a lot of these teachings also outside of the Bible from Jesus as well. They just were not approved by the church 300 years after the death of Jesus. It's okay. We can just acknowledge that the church did not approve these other books 300 years after the time of Jesus, but some of these other books were written by followers of Jesus that learned from his disciples, maybe. But we don't have to be afraid of them. We can just read them and better understand the teachings of the Master. So I encourage you to learn more